Our speaker this morning is Gerry Murphy. Gerry is a former priest of the Catholic Diocese in Oakland, California. He resigned from his ministry there in 2005, and since then has worked in retreat centers in Arizona and Florida. He was also director of the Jubilee House here in Abingdon. He's a freelance writer for a number of online news media websites when he feels inspired. He has two kids, Bernadette and Marin. They're 14 and 13. He is a published author. He works as a language coach and just graduated from the Holistic Learning Center in New Jersey as a certified spiritual life coach. That's a lot. You got a lot going on. Gerry is speaking to us this morning. I'm going to mispronounce his name, Gerry. How do you pronounce his name?
My name?
No, hit the master coach.
Oh, Hugh D'Alconzo. Hugh D'Alconzo.
Hugh D'Alconzo.
Yep.
Who is the founder of the Holistic Learning Center. And so Gerry is taking some of his research and distilling it down for us a little bit here. And I'm going to mute.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Yeah, Hugh D'Alconzo is not a name that probably any of you are possibly familiar with. I wasn't either until I was doing some online research in January looking for a new direction for my own life, and I came across the Holistic Learning Center. So he's the founder of the Holistic Learning Center, and it's up in New Jersey. A little background on him: he was a high school teacher for 10 or so years, and then got into the franchise business and helped a lot of businesses to become, Fortune 500 businesses. And he made millions doing this work himself. And then it all fell apart and he lost those millions. And himself and his family went from living in a palatial home with swimming pool and Mercedes car to living in a one-room apartment with barely any heat. So he went through the crash syndrome. But out of that, he started doing a lot of deep, intensive self-help healing work on himself. So he basically spent years reading up on classic self-help authors like Dr. Wayne Dyer, Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra, Louise Hayes, Ram Dass, Michael Singer, Thich Nhat Hanh, Gary Zukav, you name it. He read up on hundreds of self-help authors. He attended a lot of their talks, went on weekend retreat intensives. So basically became a scholar of their work. And then he learned how not only to understand their transformational teachings, but how to apply them. And this is then what he felt was his calling, and with his background as a teacher, basically to put together a program to train teachers to teach this kind of spiritual penicillin, as he calls it. So based on all of this research of all these gurus he'd studied and attended their talks and what have you, he formed a core staff and they continued their research. And what they discovered was these gurus and religious authors and self-help authors, he came up with, they were teaching basically 16 overlapping core lessons. And they discovered that these souls, as he's called them, were educating people about the same universal truths, but they were doing it using their own particular terminology. Then he organized these spiritual lessons into a 16-chapter transformational book, which is called Self-Mastery, A Journey Home to Your Inner Self. And that's an A4 size substantial textbook. That was the main book that I worked from over the 6 months that I studied with him and the class. And then he's written a number of other psycho-spiritual textbooks. So he's basically a teacher, but they're the only school in the United States that has a certification program to train spiritual life coaches. And there are many reasons for that, and the type of tools and spiritual exercises that they use, and the diagnostic measurements and to measure people's progress. They do a lot of things that your average kind of life coach may not and probably does not do. Okay, enough about him. So with all of these 16 overlapping lessons. He wrote a short textbook. It's just a little short book. It's right here, and where he kind of condensed them into 7 universal spiritual truths. And I thought I would just share those with you. I'll tell you what they are, then I'll give a little commentary on what I understand them to mean. I would say, if you have a pen handy, jot down anything that particularly resonates with you. And, you know, so we can open up this for a little bit of discussion afterwards. Just maybe one thing that resonates you, what it is and why it resonates with you. Now, I will use the word God a lot in this presentation, only because this is the word that he uses. I normally use, when I refer to you know, our source of being, I use that term, our source of being, or I use divine consciousness. Some people use Buddha consciousness, Christ consciousness. It really doesn't matter what you use. So yes, this talk presupposes that those of us here maybe have some belief in or understanding of or connection with the divine. You may not. You may be atheistic, humanistic, or agnostic. You're searching though, and that's a good thing. So hopefully that part of you will relate to what I share. Okay, so let me give you the 7 truths that he condensed everything into, and then I'll give a kind of a commentary on them. So truth 1, you have never made a mistake, because as a God-like being, you are incapable of error or failure. Truth 2, most of your core foundational beliefs are rooted in fear. Truth 3, you have no enemies, just lessons. Truth 4, as you spiritually ascend with truth, you bring to view more of your ego-based avoidance patterns. Truth 5, you are never alone because God is always with you. Truth 6, your spiritual growth requires action. And truth 7, you have God-like abilities. All right, I'm going to pull up a few slides, and this should work on PowerPoint or on Zoom. So let me pull up, because I've just got 7 slides with the wording, so you have them. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's start with that. Share my screen. All right. So I'm going to pull up my slides and start with the first one. Can you see that, Amy? Can you give me a confirmation if you can see the slide that I've put up? You can see it. Okay. All right. So the first truth, you've never made a mistake, because as a godlike being, you are incapable of error or failure. So what do we mean by that? Okay, so from the perspective of the infinite correlation of a perfectly evolving universe, you have done what you have done, and you have allowed others to do what they did to you in order to learn, grow, and evolve spiritually. That's the first point. In a perfectly evolving universe, it cannot be any other way. So in other words, you've never made a mistake, because everything that you experienced, and that's what we do as conscious creators, we create experiences. You experienced to evolve spiritually. This includes your most painful and pleasurable life lessons. So our so-called mistakes, if you will, were very valuable and necessary lessons that we needed to experience, because we learn by trial and error. Okay. So what we perceive as error is either what he would say our old karma burning off, or our spiritual evolution manifesting. In other words, we are reaping what we have sown. And in that way, we're learning a valuable life lesson. So an error or failure, as we perceive it, is just an egoic justification, an excuse to deny that what we did or a reason to blame another for what happened. So we need to own what we did, or we fall into the blame, shame, victim game. So in other words, we learn the lesson and we forget the experience and we move on. So what we create is we create experiences so that we can learn the lessons that we incarnated, as I believe, to master and to burn the karma we needed to burn via the law of sowing and reaping. Okay, so that's the first one. That's the gist of the first spiritual truth. Number two. All right. Most of your core foundational beliefs are rooted in fear. So I want to go back to our parenting days. I think a lot of us suffer from or struggle with parental idealization. We look back on our parental days through rose-tinted glasses. We don't all do that, but many of us tend to do. We have blind spots, many of them. So most of our caretakers' foundational beliefs were rooted in fear, which they unconsciously passed on to us. And it should be fairly obvious why most of our foundational beliefs are rooted in fear rather than in love. Now, I'm sure, most of our caretakers, our parents, did the best job they could. But unknowingly, unconsciously, they programmed us with the same fears and prejudices that they learned from their parents. And that's how the cycle works and continues and perpetuates itself. So if you still tend to parentally idealize your parental experiences, then it is important for you to own that no one had perfect parents. Most parents, if not all parents, have fears, hang-ups, and neuroses. As children, we minimize or we deny or we repress our parents' dysfunctionalities. Why? A survival mechanism. Those are childhood ego defense mechanisms we needed to use as children or we would not have survived. Do we need to use them now when we're emotionally triggered? No, because they're not highly functional. But most of us default to childhood ego defense mechanisms unless we bring it into our awareness. We begin to feel, acknowledge, own, and release what needs to be felt, owned, and released. Most of us don't do that. Therefore, when we're triggered, we go right back to those default emotional blocks. So, okay. So we must be willing to clean. He keeps talking about cleaning the slate of your mind of the limiting, self-defeating programs that have hindered us since our childhood. And we do that with what he calls discreation exercises. And we were taught and trained how to use these, and I use these on my practice clients. Discreating means to stop continuing to create the negative programming and the negative core beliefs that are hindering your spiritual and your moral growth. Most of the time, you're doing it unconsciously. But when you bring it into your awareness, you can be trained how to reverse that process and how to reprogram your subconscious mind with something more holistic and healing and life-giving. Okay, I think that's all I want to say on the second one. No, I'll just conclude with one final point that I highlighted here, that this truth teaches us why our core foundational beliefs are rooted in fear and why they need to be, as I said earlier, surfaced, felt, released, and discreated so that we can enjoy living a conscious, self-empowered life. And that's what my work will be as a spiritual life coach, helping people to do that, pure and simple. All right, number 3. You have no enemies, just lessons. Okay, just a few points on that. All those you perceive as enemies, your ego has assigned that status for 3 reasons. 1, to justify your fear-based actions. 2, to create a justification for why your ego thinks you failed. And 3, to give you an excusa, which is Latin for not at cause, for why it's okay to keep failing. And that's why people sabotage their own best efforts. Okay, so assigning enemy status to someone or something, maybe such as an addiction, allows us to go unconscious to the spiritual lesson that it was designed to teach us. And the law of attraction will keep drawing more so-called enemies into our life, creating even more dramatic experiences until we finally learn the lesson that they were designed to teach us. Now, if we, maybe better pronoun, if we unconsciously deny the truth that our lessons are trying to teach us, we will keep recreating the same sequence of events over and over again until, as a call for help, one day we will ask ourselves, why is this happening to me again? Because what we consider our enemies are actually teachers in disguise. And they will keep reappearing in our lives until we learn the lesson they have come to teach us. That's basically it in a nutshell on that particular point. So the more you think that a person, a nation is your enemy, the more important the lesson is that he or she has come here to teach you. Now, you all know that I grew up in Northern Ireland. I lived there most of my life. And at that time, going through that 30-year period of that deeply, deeply divided war zone is what it really was. It was a very divided, hostile, sectarian environment. I mean, socially, educationally, religiously, it was extremely segregated. So that bred a lot of deep fear, ignorance, and suspicion regarding the other. We lived in segregated housing areas, schools were separate, everything was separate. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s, well, I mean, I went to a community college and got to mix with those from the Protestant community and et cetera, and then I went to university. But I was in my 20s and I helped to facilitate a program called the Ulster Project, which has been running for about 30 years, bringing young teenagers, both Catholics and Protestants from Northern Ireland, here to the United States. They stay here for a month, they live with host families, and they participate in a lot of activities. And they're doing this for the first time in their lives. They don't know each other. They've never engaged in discussing the bigotries and the cultural and historical differences that separated them and that killed thousands over that 30-year period. But over that 1 month here in the United States, the idea being you're bringing to a country where there's supposed tolerance and acceptance of all kinds of nationalities and languages. That may not always be the case, of course, but that was the idea, to take them out of our parochial war zone to a country that has this diversity and so-called tolerance. So, but the program did prove to be healing and reconciling, and none of those kids ever returned to Northern Ireland to participate in paramilitary activities. Not one, and thousands of them have participated in the program. So, but in order to get there, they and me had to overcome cultural conditioning and erroneous perceptions of each other, all of course rooted in fear. Okay, let me move swiftly on to the next one, which is the fourth spiritual truth. As you spiritually ascend with truth, you bring to view more of your ego-based avoidance patterns. Well, first of all, what does it mean to spiritually ascend? Well, what I mean by that is simply at some point in your life, it could be just an intense encounter with another person. It could be having done an intensive retreat for a weekend. Something elevated your level of consciousness to a point of awakening that you'd never reached before. And you're in a place where you almost become the witness, observer of your life. And you see the perceived mistakes or the dysfunctionalities or the emotional triggers, whatever it is that has kind of sabotaged your life in some regards to that point, you see it with new eyes. That's kind of a spiritual ascension. However, for most people, it's a scary place to be in, because to take then the necessary steps they need to go to really understand and grok what that means and to apply that teaching in their life is asking a lot of them. And that's where the egoic fears will come in and hinder their growth. But you do get the bird's eye view. You see what's going on and you see what you need to do. But that's where the ego-based avoidance patterns will kick in. So a spiritual ascension requires us to continuously increase awareness of our own inner truth. And the higher we spiritually ascend, the easier it will be for us to view our own and others' very subtle egoic deceptions. And if we are unwilling to own the truth that our ascension experience is allowing us to see, then our unconscious beliefs will go on autopilot. This will cause us to involuntarily and unconsciously reproduce our negative experiences over and over again. And ascension experiences unlock enormous amounts of depressed life force energy, but it takes moral courage to go somewhere with that life force energy. Because as we spiritually ascend, we must continually see, feel, release, and discreate our old fixed beliefs, the emotional and the mental roadblocks that are holding us back. And if we do that, it will free up large amounts of life force energy. And that's God's life force, lovingly conscious energy within you, so that we can live a consciously creating life filled with love, joy, and willingness to do the self-mastery work. Now, when we spiritually ascend, our newfound enlightenment helps us to see, as I said, those ego-based avoidance patterns, so that when we see them, then we can learn the tools how to spiritually transcend them. And this truth helps us to remember that none of life's lessons is a one and done, because the spiritual transformation process of seeing, feeling, and healing is an evolutionary, ongoing process of psycho-spiritual growth. Okay, where am I going with that? Let's go to the next one, truth 5. So we're coming home here in a few moments to lands. You were never been alone. God is always with you. What do I mean? What do I mean by that? Okay, so this is what I believe, and this is what he's written here. We are all unique manifestations of the same universal spirit. Call it universal consciousness, call it divine consciousness, call it what you will. It doesn't matter what we call it. It's the life force energy of the universe. Some people call it quantum energy, God, Ram, Buddha consciousness, Shakti. It doesn't matter. And these are all different names for the one universal spirit. And no matter what you call the life force energy of the universe, you are, as I believe, a spiritual being composed of light, energy, and love, which is why spirit is always with you. You're never alone, because you're spiritually one with the collective consciousness. And Buddha terminology would be called namaste consciousness, recognizing, engaging with, and honoring the divine in all. Now, the God force energy that makes your heart beat, lets you breathe effortlessly, digest your food, make babies, you name it. All of these things are happening unconsciously. We're not aware of them. We're not telling them what to do. Millions and millions, trillions of electrical impulses, you name it, going on in our bodies every single day. And we're not telling them what to do. Where's that coming from? Where's that loving, knowing intelligence and consciousness coming from? Connecting with it is namaste consciousness. The God force is constantly sending us intuitive messages. This is a skill where you really have to learn to distinguish between your composite parts, your mind, your body, your ego thoughts, your feelings. But to listen intuitively to the message of spirit, that means tuning into your heart chakra. That's where you hear and feel intuitive messages communicated to from spirit, from your higher self, from your soul, call it what you will. And communicating messages of love and hope and faith and guidance. And our job is to learn how to interpret these intuitive spiritual communications. I just want to add to that a little quote from my own book from, I don't know what chapter, I think it's A Designer God chapter, just to amplify that point, where I say, in the final analysis, the uncontainable, ever new, ever emergent, ever evolving, ever whimsical, ever surprising, ever chaotic, ever paradoxical light energy of the divine interpenetrates every breath we take and every experience we have as conscious human beings. Birth, rebirth, and the rhythms of life, music and the heartbeat of creation, evident in every cell and molecule that constitutes our known universe, attest to a universal, loving intelligence that knows how to heal, renew, grow, expand, organize, and reorganize itself as the ever-changing circumstances of its environment demand. Okay, let's move it on to, where are we with this number? Okay, this is number 6, I think. Spiritual growth requires action. All right, so thoughts exist as energy vibrations in our mind. Words are verbal expressions of thought energy, but it's our deeds that actually transform our life. That's because nothing constructive can happen until we take action. Why am I afraid to experience what it is I incarnated to learn? And this reminds me of Marianne Williamson's poem, Our Deepest Fear, which I think Nelson Mandela kind of made quite famous when he was released from prison. It reminds me of the lines, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And I'm stressing this because I think there are many well-meaning holistic souls who are really sold on prayer, affirmations, meditation, but these spiritual practices alone are not enough because faith without action serves no useful purpose. In other words, if we believe what we believe with conviction, we will act on it. All right, I think I'm going to move into the last one, and then we're going to open it up a little bit. So, all right. So you have godlike abilities. So if we are made in the image and likeness of God, if we use that as a metaphor, it really means that we are one with the Namaste consciousness, with divine consciousness. We are a facet of the divine. If so, we have the same conscious creative abilities, even if we're not aware of them. Now, our ego mind is a defensive, fear-based system. We needed it to survive as children. We still need it for a sense of, subjective identity and for many other reasons. But it will try to make us feel as if we are not the co-creator of our own reality in many different ways. But if we believe that we are the co-creator of our own life, if we don't believe that, if we do not believe that we are the co-creator of our own life, then we are denying the existence of our godlike abilities. When we feel that we are at our lowest point emotionally, at some intuitive level, we know that we created it. Our disempowering beliefs block the place which your God force energy flows from, which, and that in turn disconnects you from sensing and feeling and intuiting your godlike abilities. So ultimately, whether you believe that you are an adult of God who has godlike abilities, a soul deserving of love, health, and abundance, or you believe that you are not worthy of love, you are right. Why? Because we will manifest what we believe. Because the simple, basic secret of creation is that as an adult of God, our beliefs create our reality. So I want to just conclude by what I want to do here is I want to use Marianne Williamson's poem, My Deepest Fear, but another certified spiritual life coach paraphrased it with a slightly different terminology. So I want to just conclude my reflection by sharing with you her version of Marianne Williamson's My Deepest Fear. My deepest egoic fear is not that I am powerless. My deepest fear is that I am powerful beyond measure. It is my power, not my egoic fears, that most frightens my ego, edging God out. I ask myself, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who am I not to be? I am an adult of God. My playing small doesn't serve the world. There's nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around me. I am meant to shine like all adult children do. I am meant to manifest the glory of God that is within me. It's not just in some of us, it's in all of us. And the more I allow myself to express my power, I unconditionally self-empower others to do the same. As I liberate myself, capital S, from my own ego-terrified inner child fears, my presence automatically liberates others. That's it from me. Thank you for listening.